Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Daphne. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And my co-host today, who organized this presentation, is Regina Fitzpatrick, who is our genealogy librarian. It is both of our pleasures to present our speaker today, Miss Edna Velez from the New Jersey State Archives. She has worked at the New Jersey State Archives for over 20 years, where she has spent time helping researchers learn more about their families. An expert on New Jersey records, Edna is able to advise and guide researchers through the State Archives collections, Ancestry.com, Family Search, and other genealogy resources. In addition to assisting others, Edna has also spent many years researching her own family and that of her husband. From 20th century Puerto Rico to colonial New England, Edna has explored a wide variety of collections in multiple languages. In addition to reference work, Edna has also worked on several important indexing projects to make state archives records collections more accessible to the general public. This includes participating in transcription of the New Jersey death indexes, May 1848 through December 1900, close to 930,000 records. So welcome, Edna. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we jump in, just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the program, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. After the webinar, there will be a survey. We ask that if you have time, please complete the survey. We always love hearing your feedback. And if you're looking for more information on New Jersey genealogy, Regina has a fantastic genealogy research guide that's available at the web address on the screen there. I highly recommend that you check that out for all your genealogy needs. One last thing before we jump into the program is I just want to go over the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, your dashboard may look a little bit different depending on the device that you are using. In the bottom left-hand corner, you will see your audio settings. This is where you can check to make sure that if you're using an external listening device, that it's correctly plugged in and synced with Zoom. At any point during the presentation, if you have any problems, there is a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that. That'll alert me and I will send you a message in Zoom to hopefully resolve any problems that you are having. And as I mentioned before, we will be taking your questions at the end of the program, but you can either use the chat button or the Q&A button to submit them, or if you have any comments you'd like to share, certainly please feel free to use the chat button and share them. So that is everything that I have for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Edna now.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me. I just wanted to, some of you may know who I am. I started working at the archives in September 2001, right after 9/11. And I did not think I'd still be working there. So I'm very happy to still be there. One of the things that people may not know is how I became interested in genealogy. And that happened as a result of reading a book by Anne Rice called Queen of the Dam. And that I found interesting because one of the women who was a witch, gave birth to a child and later became a vampire, she started keeping track of all her descendants. And for 6,000 years, she kept track of every single descendant. And she had a large room with a big wall map. And she listed every single descendant. I thought that was fascinating. So I wanted to do something similar. I can't go back that far, but I did go back as far as I can. And I thought I'd share a couple of interesting things that I have found on my husband's family. So one of the things I remember was my husband, as a young boy, remembers driving long distance. And it took him forever, he said, to go see his uncle. And he didn't realize what it was he was doing. He just sat in the car. And that's when he later found out he was driving to Trenton once a month, to Trenton State Prison. And that's where we go to slide number 1. That's where he learned that an uncle of his went to jail. At that time, the family lived in Jersey City, Union City, Hudson County area. And that's where you see that he had assaulted a 10-year-old girl. And if it wasn't for the little boys, her brother and another boy to help her, who knows what would have happened. And they did pick him up, and he did go to jail. And in slide number 2, you're going to see that he went to jail for several times. He went to jail, one for breaking and entering, and one for forgery. The forgery was in Danbury, and the other one, the breaking and entering, was right here in Bordentown. He did go to jail. He spent about 10 years in jail in Trenton State Prison. And he finally did get out, got married, and lived in Jersey City until about 2010 when he passed away. But we never heard from that family again after he came out of jail. The next slide, slide number 3, was my husband's grandfather. And I was interested to see this article on the front page of the Jersey Journal. And he was taken to the hospital. And I thought that was interesting until I kept reading that he was arrested on drunk charges and taken to St. Mary's Hospital, where he had several seizures. And again, we thought nothing new about that until we saw his death certificate, which is on the next slide, slide number 4. And I know it's the right person, George Raymond O'Brien. Sometimes he went by George, sometimes he went by Ray. What I found interesting is his cause of death. They have pneumonia. That nowhere on there do they show he had a seizure of any kind. And I'm wondering if the seizure was a result of his drinking and getting into a fight. But of course, we don't know. My mother-in-law never knew what happened to her father. All she knew was that he left the family. He disappeared and he was found on the street dead. The brother-in-law came to the house and he told his sister-in-law, your husband is dead and you have to bury him. And the wife refused to bury him because he abandoned his family 9 years before. But eventually he was buried in Holy Cross in North Arlington. You know, the church took care of him. But this is what happens. And of course, she never knew this. I, working at the archives and having access to all the newspapers, I found out this one. And my husband thought it was interesting. The next one, slide number 5, is a sad one. Lena Gayweiler, my husband's great aunt, got married February 12, 1911. And you think it'd be a very happy occasion, marriage, and then eventually children. Unfortunately for her, she passed away a year later. And you see on the next slide, she passed away March 15th, 1912 from tuberculosis. And that was sad. I only discovered her because she was buried with my husband's grandmother, and I wanted to know who this woman was that was buried with the grandmother. And so then I said, well, wait a minute, she's married. Where's the husband? They're not buried together. So I searched and searched until I found the husband on August 10th, 1913. They found his body in the Hackensack River. He committed suicide. Everyone said that he was so distraught of losing his wife. And so he killed himself. The sad part is they could not be buried together. So he was buried in Weehawken Cemetery, a few miles up in North Bergen. So to me, while it may be scandalous because of the suicide, it was very sad also. So that's why I included this one here. Another sad one that we have in the family was Elizabeth Gillick. On the census for the 1900, I was wondering where she was. She wasn't with her family. And she was in Secaucus at the lunatic asylum. And you can see she was on line 17 toward the bottom. I highlighted that one. And young woman, no idea why she was there. She was just committed. And nobody in the family knows at all. In fact, some of them never knew she even existed. So if it wasn't for the census, we wouldn't even know. And I did stumble on her death certificate, which is on the next screen here. And this is one of the other ways I found, because it did say she was in the hospital for the insane. Again, this was sad. She was one of 9 children. So I said, oh, that is sad. So I wanted to include her. When I do research, I want to not just go parent to grandparent and keep going up. I like to see the whole family. So I wanted to include her as well. In fact, this whole Gillick family is kind of interesting. Because one of her brothers, in the next slide, you're going to see him in the census in 1930. He turned out to be a very, very wealthy man. He was the CEO of American Type Foundry in Jersey City on Communipal Avenue. And you can see, I have him highlighted. And underneath, they were so wealthy, he had a Japanese servant. And so I thought that was interesting. We never knew how wealthy he was. All we knew, he was very wealthy. And from my understanding, he was a 1/3 owner of Jersey Journal at the time. This was like in the 1930s. So he was very wealthy. Yes, during the Depression. One of the things is that before his Japanese servant, he had another servant who was Hindu. And that was in the on the slide number 11. And they had to call the police because they saw someone had entered the house. And so on the screen on slide 11, you're going to see that they entered the house, but nobody stole anything. They just left a letter. And the note they left, they said, "See, mister, I want you to quit that man, apparently the Hindu, from the house. I was here tonight and I thought I would get him, but I missed him. I did not get him, but I will get him. I will get him some other time. If he wants steady work, tell him to give up the case. Mister, put this man from your house before he gets in trouble. If you don't quit him, I will be here next time, and I am sure I will get him, and I will do worse to him than today." I found that very interesting. This, as you can see, a lot of the newspaper articles I found on Genealogy Bank. They have many of the Jersey City newspapers. And this story here, I never knew existed until I just put in his name and I found it, and I found this one kind of interesting.
Did the servant end up quitting his that night?
He must have, because this was 1924, and the Japanese servant was in 1930 census, so he must have. So, but nobody knew this part. And my understanding, they had elaborate parties in the house too. Supposedly Fanny Brice and all kinds of actors and singers and stuff like that. So that would have been interesting to see. The next slide is that slide number 12. Yes, that this man, because he had a lot of money, had an apartment in New York City. In fact, he had apartments in Paris, as well as New York, and he had a home in Jersey City on Duncan Avenue. But on this one here, a woman is suing him for a breach of contract because supposedly he proposed to her. And I guess it was a good idea at the time, but maybe he changed his mind or something happened. And he did not want to marry her. So she wanted to sue him. And the courts wanted her to prove how he, that she had to give up her medical studies, which I'm not sure about that part. How did he propose, when he proposed, and things like that. I'll tell you the truth, even though he was innocent, supposedly innocent, I think he was guilty. I think he really did propose. He changed his mind. He never married. And also too, my understanding is that when he died, a woman came from France asking for the house he had in France, so she would keep quiet and not cause a scandal. So of course they signed over the house. But again, he never married. So if it wasn't for my husband's aunt telling me some of these stories, I would never know. On the next slide, you're going to see is he didn't leave a will. But on the top figure, you see $303,000 he was worth at the time, which was 1935 when he died. But today it'd be worth over $6.5 million today, which is a lot of money. Even after paying all the bills and everything else, he was left with $152,000, which today would be $3.2 million, which is still a lot of money. At that time, out of 9 children, there were only 5 left. So they divide the money out 5 ways, and they each got about $30,000, which is the equivalent of about almost $700,000, which I would be very happy to have right now. But in less than 10 years' time, the money was gone. And one of the sisters was a sister. She was a nun. And they were upset that she received $30,000 because it immediately went to the church. And that they did not like. But fair was fair. She got her share and it was donated to the church. It just happens another sister became a nun as well. Unfortunately, she died very young. She was only 25 when she died. And through the help of the Hudson County Historical Society, we found that she died in Baltimore and she was buried there. So I thank them for that, because without their help, I never would have known what happened to her. So I like that part. The next slide is a marriage. Today I found this on Family Search, but 20 years ago when I started finding this, I went to Seton Hall University to look at their films. And so you could see they got married on June 12, 1889 in Jersey City at St. Peter's. Edward Reifenberg, and they put in parentheses Lutheran, marrying a Julia. Her name was Smith and her married name was Gillick. So she was a widow. This was her third marriage. She was married before to a John Lawley, but her third marriage was to Mr. Reifenberg here. And they have their ages as the same, 36, which we later found out is not right. She made herself younger because she was at least 4 years older, but that's okay. The problem with this, looking at this is fine. The problem is Mr. Reifenberg was still married to his first wife. And I cannot find any records saying that he was divorced. Okay, no problem. And what happens is that, any of you familiar with Jersey City, Montgomery Street, the Reifenbergs lived on the northern part of Montgomery Street on Wayne, I believe it's Wayne Avenue. And Julia Smith, Gillick, Lolly, Reifenberg, whatever name you want to use, lived on the southern part on York. And he went from house to house. It was only maybe 10 blocks away, if that. And he had two families at the same time. He eventually sent his first wife back to Columbia County, New York. And because he couldn't have both at the same time. Who knows? Maybe they discovered each other. I don't know. But he only had one here. So the following year, 1890, this is where it gets a little interesting. Because in the next slide, you're going to see a birth. This one's from our records. You see how it's pink. I try to get a copy of the original so that you can see what they look like. The thing is, though, you see unnamed Reifenberg male, born April 7, 1890. He was born on Montgomery Street in Jersey City. He was baptized Edward, but later on, they changed the name to Lester. Don't know why, but they did at the time. The thing is, though, take a good look at that date, April 7, 1890. Because in the next slide, you're going to see is he had a son named Alva Reifenberg, born July 20th, 1890. What's that? 3-4 months apart. So he didn't give up wife number one while he was still with wife number 2. So that's why he was my interesting man here. Oh, he was a boat captain. I should have said that. And he had a boat and he went up and down the Hudson River. And it was very easy for him to go down because at that time, the family was in Germantown, New York, and that's right off the Hudson River in Columbia County. But the next slide you're going to see is also interesting because this was a marriage that was in Manhattan. And you're going to see it took place in January 4, 1899. And he was using the name Edward this time. Sometimes he went by Ephraim, sometimes he went by Edward. He still had his boat, but now he married a Rosa Court. And of course, he says he's 38 years old when he's really about 48. And of course, he married a younger woman. Okay, I understand that. But as far as I know, he never got a divorce. He was still married to wife number 1, supposedly wife number 2, and now wife number 3. And they did have a son, which they named Edward, who was born in 1902. But when you take a look at the next census, that one might be a little hard to read, but the top part shows Germantown, New York, and he's on the census with his first wife and his children. And one of them is named Edna, who was born right here in Jersey City. The middle one is the census in 1900 also in Jersey City, Hudson County, with wife number 2 with all of her children. The last census on the bottom. He is in Manhattan with wife number 3 and her 2 children from a previous marriage because the other son just wasn't born yet. So he was counted 3 times in the 1900 census. He was in the 1890 census, 95 census, he was counted twice. In 1905 census, he was counted twice. 1910, he was counted twice. So I don't know if they can make a correction on that or not, but I don't think they care after 120 years.
No, and they'll want to keep it in because you gotta preserve all the
Exactly.
naughtiness.
No, and nobody knew this. Nobody knew. The one thing we did know is when he died, they knew the other family took the body. So they knew of my husband's family in Jersey City, and the Jersey City family knew of the husband in New York. What they did not know until after I discovered it, I found his, on the next slide, you're going to see Edward Reifenberg's death certificate that I found at the state library, state archives, He died in May of 1920. And of course, the wife is the informant, Rose Reifenberg, on the slide. And he died of heart failure. But each wife on the death certificates listed him as their spouse. But nobody knew of wife number 3 until I introduced them to all this. And so he is on a tombstone in upstate New York, listed with wife number 1. And he is buried in Lutheran Cemetery in Middle Village, Queens, in New York, with wife's number 3 family. And nobody knew this until I discovered this at the archives. No obituary. I would have loved to have seen his obituary to see what happened. Also to this Edward Reifenberg, before he died, his father died in 1901, left him $1 in his will because who knows what else he was up to besides no good. So he only left him $1. And so the next slide, which is okay, this is this slide here is the one that shows he died in 1920, and it does show the wife, and he's buried in New York. But like I said, every wife has them listed as a spouse. It wasn't until later, so I thought it was interesting. So the first wife to die was my next and last slide here, was Julia. She was the first to die in 1921 on Halloween. So and again, no obituary. I found that when I took a picture of this slide, I found it interesting because the top typed written portion, look, instead of blue ink, it looks like it's like a greenish turquoise color. So I thought that was interesting. So that's why I wanted that one in color. So it made it interesting. And she's buried in Holy Cross Cemetery in North Arlington with her children. I have no idea where husband number 2 or husband number 1's buried. I haven't found those people yet. I don't know. They're so maybe one day I'll find them. The third wife, I don't have an obituary for her, but she didn't die until 1944. So she outlived all of her husband's ex-wives, which I found interesting.
Her sister wives.
Oh my goodness gracious. So I found all of them. So I said, okay, this should be a little interesting. Unfortunately, by the time I found some of this, my mother-in-law had passed away. She died when Eric was only 5 months old. And then my father-in-law died in 2002. So he didn't know about many of this. I think he would have found it interesting. I think that he himself would have made lots of comments, especially my husband's father, was a troublemaker on his own. They used to steal his aunt's car from the garage off of Duncan Street in Jersey City and took it out for a joyride. They knew where the keys were to the garage, keys to the car, and they just rode around Jersey City. So they knew that. They used to have lavish parties at their homes. He went to he got kicked out of school a few times, so he wound up going to about 4 or 5 different schools before he graduated. Also too, for a while, on my husband's grandfather. For a while I said, I want to look at military records, and I want to order DD 214s. And I said, all right, let me order it. I told my husband what I wanted, filled out the forms, and I had him sign it. So there was his signature on the form. Then he tells me one day he got a call from St. Louis wanting to verify that he did want this record. He goes, yes, I do want this record. During World War II, my husband's father was in the Marines. So I had ordered the record in March. I forgot what years, so long ago. I got it the day after Christmas, so 9 months later. I got a file that was about 2 inches thick. And in that file, we started reading and noticed what a troublemaker my father-in-law was. And it turned out twice he went AWOL. And he went and joined the circus. I wish I could find articles on that. And they brought him back each time, and he kept leaving, didn't tell anybody, and they had to track him down. Until one day they put him in the brig in New Hampshire. And they gave him a choice. Either you get on that ship and go to China. This is during World War II. You get on that ship, go to China, or you can stay in the brig. He went to China. And he did get an honorable discharge, and he's buried down in Arlington in the VA cemetery. So at least he got that. But we couldn't believe it when we saw we knew he was a bad boy in his youth, but we didn't realize how bad. I don't know what. He must have calmed down long enough for Ray's mother to catch him and marry him. So, but we thought that was interesting. There's just too many interesting stories. I can't think of them all. On my side of the family, I don't have anything to put up because everything is just what stories the family tells me. My grandfather happened to marry 2 wives that both had the same name. So that was kind of unusual. And so, of course, people who I see who love to post online and create family trees have posted my mother's family tree with the wrong mother's name, and they continue making family tree with the wrong line. So I found that interesting, and never once checking with me, since I'm out there, never once checking to see if this is correct. One day, my father tells me that he went to jail. And I looked at him. I go, what do you mean you went to jail? He goes, I spent the night in jail. I said, okay, you have to tell me this. Years ago, his father was in the fields cutting the grass with a machete. And a neighbor approached him, an angry neighbor approached him and was going to attack him with a knife. So he held up his machete, and he held it up in a way that the other man misjudged, and he went to attack him, and his arm his hand was severed. So, of course, nobody knew what to do. So my grandfather spoke to his relatives and says, you need to go tell the police before this man's relatives come and kill you. So they went to the police station. They had to walk about 10 miles into town because there was no car, no horse, no nothing. Just you had to walk into town. So my father, being the oldest, walked into town with his father. They went to jail. By the time they got there, it was dark. They told them, okay, well, it's too dark for you to walk home. You have to spend the night in jail with his father. He thought it was great because the next day they gave him food. They gave him a meal, coffee, and then he was able to walk back home. So so for him, that was fine. So he went to jail. So I said, okay. I said, why didn't you tell me before? Because I never thought of it before. I just thought of it now. And that's why you need to find someone in the family who's about 80 years old or more. Because once they get to be that age, they start telling you things they would never have told you before. My mother recently told me, she goes, you know, my brother had a daughter. I go, he did? I said, why didn't you tell me? She goes, I didn't think of it before till now. I said, well, how old would his daughter be? Oh, about your age. I'm 66 now. So there's a first cousin out there that I have no idea who she is. Hopefully one day she'll go on to ancestry.com. Maybe I have her do the DNA test and she'll show up. At least I'm hoping this will happen. Another thing that happened frequently in my side of the family, which after a while it's normal, is infidelity. It was normal in the family for the men to have girlfriends, not necessarily wives, but girlfriends. And many of them had children with them. And they all knew of each other. We didn't speak too much about it, but we never turned the children away because it wasn't their fault that they were born. But it was interesting. My grandmother got into a fight because of that. She found one of my grandfather's lovers and they got into a fight. And I said, my father, I said, how do you know? He goes, because I saw the fight. And at night when she went to comb her hair was falling out because of all the hair pulling that was going on. And I said, oh my God. I said, you can't make this stuff up. I said, okay, fine. Another thing, not only in my husband's family was someone sent to the asylum, but years ago, in Puerto Rico, not many places had an asylum. The family had to take care of somebody. And it was very difficult. So I was young, maybe about 13. I went to a cousin's home and they locked away. Behind a locked door was this woman yelling and screaming because she wanted to be let out. And I, 13, what did I know? And they said, don't worry, she's all right. And of course, I'm like scared and I couldn't wait to get out of that house. And that's what they said. No, she has some mental issues and she has problems with meeting strangers, even though they're relatives, she has trouble with strangers. So I never went to that house again.
I don't blame you.
So, but like I said, this is all normal. So I don't know. Regina, you have questions for me, Regina? I'm trying to think of anything else.
Well, I know that I have questions, but Andrew, does anybody else have any?
I don't see any, but if anybody does have questions for Edna or even Regina, please feel free using the chat or the Q&A to send them on.
And Ms. Edna knows way more than me, so.
Oh, thank you
Yeah.
very much. The last
she-
something I
she
don't
taught
know.
me what I know, so, you're fine to, ask. Ask.
For genealogy bank, what kind of years does it cover?
Oh, the 1700s. Some of them start to about now. It depends on the newspapers. I specifically wanted genealogy bank for the Jersey City newspapers, and they were like the 1880s, I want to say, until about 1970s. So that I specifically wanted for that, and that was perfect. There's always something to be found. You just have to have the patience to find it. So.
I have a question, Ms. Edna.
Uh-huh.
The last two stories you told,
Mm-hmm.
the wife, the second wife, one of her marriages was Gillick, right?
Her first marriage was Gillick, and her second marriage was to a Lolly, which I understand he was a brilliant man, but he died too young. And it turns out the one that was the nun, and the one that was Joseph Gillick, those two, they were originally a Lolly, but because she had 5 children before that, it was easier to change their names all to Gillick.
Oh, so these were her children
From
the
marriage,
Lolly
from the
marriage.
Lolly marriage.
Okay.
In fact, the nun, I want to know more about the nun that the money went to. So I had heard that she was the dean of the College of St. Elizabeth over in Convent Station. So I said, okay, I'm gonna go see if I can find whatever I can about her. And I went through all the yearbooks. I couldn't find her. There was another, she was listed as Sister Maria Dorothy, and I couldn't find her. And I said, wait a minute, she's got to be here somewhere. I said, she only died 20 years ago, somebody. So I persisted, and they found a nun. And the nun says, I know exactly who she is, but she was not the dean here. Because she was the principal at St. Vincent's School in Madison, New Jersey. And she was her principal when she worked there at the school. And she remembers the two nieces that went to the school. So I found that interesting as well, finding somebody who knew she was. And luckily, there's cemetery behind the College of St. Elizabeth. There's a great big cemetery because across the street on the other side in Florham Park is the nursing home for the nuns. So I found that interesting too. Beautiful cemetery, beautiful. The whole area is beautiful.
Very cool.
So yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. So what else you have for me?
Andrew, was there anything else in chat before I fire off my next shot?
Nope, nothing in chat.
Okay.
Okay. So regarding the son, Joseph, who was highly wealthy
Yes.
and had a habit of hiring foreign, or at least foreign ancestry. I'm not sure if these individuals were American or not, or
The 1930s specifically said he was Japanese.
okay.
It's funny because in the 1920 census, just before the mother died, the mother, he owned the house. The mother was living with him, and so were some of his siblings. And they had an Irish servant, a woman. But after the mother died, for some reason, the family left the house, and he was left with this big house, and he had a servant. Don't know why they left the house, because my husband's family, his grandparents rented an apartment, must have been a large place, and because they took the sister-in-law with them, the unmarried sister-in-law. But we don't know why. But he had the house all to himself. I got the impression that after he died in 1935, two of the sisters moved their families into the house. Because the house was big enough. And if you go on Google Maps, you could see the street where this was, the house is still there. But they divided the house in half. That's how big the house is. So that, which is kind of nice, the house is still there. Several years ago, Ray and I went to Jersey City to the library to look at old newspapers. And I said, oh, let's go find the house where your grandmother was born on Montgomery Street. Well, now the house is gone and it's the back end of a school, of a playground. So the house is completely gone. And then we went by where my husband used to live on Kensington. And he goes, you know, when we go around the corner, so we went around the corner and there was this great big 10-foot high fence. And as a 6-year-old, he used to climb that 10-foot high fence because nobody was watching him. And he, as a 6-year-old, he used to play on the streets all by himself in Jersey City, and nobody watched him. So I thought that was amazing because nowadays I wouldn't let my son out, and he was 10 years old when I wouldn't let him out of the house. But back then, that's what they did.
Yeah. Well, you can see just from you talking, like how much you can use modern technology to create and build context. Like it's really fascinating to look at the family based on who they hired, who was living with them, what happened to those people, and you build so much more of a complete picture. And then using tools like Google Maps and Zillow, like I've gone on Zillow before when people are doing like historic house research. So that I can link them. Oh, look, the house is for sale now, or it was a couple of years ago. Here's the listing. You can see what it looks like inside now.
If it wasn't for years ago when I started researching it in 1999, I had to physically go to the library. I had to physically know what newspaper to look at, know what dates to look at. So it was a lot harder. The last 10 years, maybe less, with newspapers.com, Genealogy Bank, and even on the library's website through Newsbank, all the newspapers that are popping up left and right, it has gotten so much easier to find these articles. I never would have known that a woman in New York was suing him for breach of contract. I never would have known about the Hindu servants saying get rid of them or else. I never would have found those, if it wasn't for all these online newspapers now.
Yeah, that's cool. And another really great resource that we have that people don't think of that's really, really useful. And I was thinking about it as you were describing Montgomery Street. And then again, when you were telling me about the nun and where she taught and where the cemetery was, is the fire insurance maps online database, which we have access to. It's the Sanborn maps.
Yes.
And I use that really frequently in genealogy questions, especially if people are trying to get a sense of the neighborhood their ancestor lived in, or like the placement. Like I had a question about what parish a family might have joined in a particular city. And it so happened I was able to find them on the census, go into the fire insurance map, and boom, there's this massive church a block away from their house. And I'm like, okay, well, there's a very good possibility
that's their church.
That's their church, especially if you said they went to the elementary school, which is right there. So
another thing that I recently helped someone out with, they remember a young girl in their neighborhood and they used to help her out. And she wanted to know what happened to this young girl. They moved away. They had no idea what happened to the family. So what happened was, and I go, well, what's the family name? And they remember the surname. She remembered the little girl's name, but she didn't remember the parents' name. So we were trying to figure out, how do we find these people? And of course, this is in the 60s and 70s, which starts to get a little bit harder to research. So I don't know what made me think of it, but I said, what about public records? Most counties, most towns now, you're paying your taxes. you can see who owns a particular house on a particular street, who owns the house. So we said, okay, let's see. She knew what street it was on, what town. She knew the house. She knew everything except the family name. We did a property search. She found the family name. Unfortunately, we could not find an obituary for this family. And I guess this family's too goody two shoe because we couldn't find anything about them. So we think the parents are still alive, but she cannot find that. She wanted to see what happened to the daughter. But so until one of them dies and has an obituary, we don't know what happened to the family. But that's another resource, public records, property records, and find them.
Somebody has asked, what was the story about the Rockefellers?
What happened was, in my research, of course, my husband's family never knew this. You go on Ephraim/Edward Reifenberg. You go up that family line. That family, through the Reifenberg Denegard, you keep going up. And I found about 1750, a Michael Denegard married a Maria Reifenberg. Excuse me, Rockefeller, I'm sorry. And everybody kept teasing me, oh, you're related to John D. So I said, what? There's thousands of Rockefellers up there. I said, maybe not possible. So through the internet, the miracle of internet, I found a second cousin of my husband, who turns out to be Edward Reifenberg's daughter, Edna's granddaughter. So Edna here talking. And she goes, we're related to the famous Rockefellers, John D. And I said, yeah, but we're not the rich ones. She goes, no, we're not the rich ones. Everyone's poor except John D and all his descendants. Everyone else is poor. They're all poor. In fact, many of them are somewhat wealthy, but we got the poor end of the area.
That's okay, you got the Gillick.
I got
But none of the wealth trickled down.
the wealth did not come down to us. None of the wealth came down. So none of the wealth came down to us.
That's like my multi-million-dollar wealth. It was probably less back then, but like using your inflation calculator, it was probably worth millions of dollars. They owned a cannery in Alaska.
Ooh.
They didn't live up there, but made them
Quite
wealthy. And the description of the daughter's wedding was very, very flowery. And it lasted to my dad in terms of his college tuition.
Mhm.
My dad is not rich. I am not rich, unfortunately.
Didn't make it to you.
But his grandfather and my dad had 8 siblings. Every single one of them got a free college tuition as long as they went to school in Boston, because the family alma mater was Harvard.
Nice.
And so he realized, especially since, some of them were going to college in the late 60s. And I think that was while Radcliffe, like before the Radcliffe College became part of Harvard. So he figured for the girls, well, they might not be able to get into Harvard. So 2 of my uncles did go to the family alma mater. They went to Harvard, but the rest of the kids went and got their education in Boston so they could get free college. And that's when all the money petered out.
When I get a chance, probably after the holidays, after I finish crocheting, I am going to see if I can concentrate more on the line that's up in upstate New York, because I want to see if I can get my son into the SAR. And I know I have 2 lines for sure, but I am curious about some of those people. Many of them came in 1710 with the Palatine group. So I've been going through Henry Jones's book, and I said, I know that name, I know that name. So when I get a chance, I want to research them a little bit more. Because I think that would be interesting. And then as more and more newspapers from New York become available, I'm sure I'll find something juicy on that too.
And Ms. Edna comes over to the library frequently to use our
Absolutely.
resources. So one of the things she was doing this past summer was
Oh.
looking at the Rockefeller.
Rockefellers and Ostranders. That's another thing too. Anybody who has the name Ostrander, they're all related. They are all related because when the father came over, he had 10 children and they changed their, I forgot what the original name was, but they changed the name and all the children took that name. So they're all related and they are all across the country. I think even in Canada, they're all over the place. So if you do see a name, they're all related. So I found that kind of interesting too.
Andrew, anybody else have any questions?
No, no more questions. So I think we can go ahead and end it there. So we'd just like to extend our sincere thanks again to Edna for sharing her family history in honor of National Family History Month.
Thank you.
We truly appreciate your time and all the hard work you've put in and sharing those experiences with us. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. You make our programming worthwhile, and we appreciate your continued support. So I'd just like to end and tell everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.